Right, this is the Environmental Protection Commission special meeting on May 14th, 2025. This meeting is to discuss our input for the 2026 Plan of Conservation and Development for the town of Darien. Why don't you introduce yourself so people know who you are on TV?
Sure, my name is Neil Desai, principal planner from the company is H&H, Hardesty, Hanover.
And you're out of where?
I work out of the New York City office. Yeah.
Okay. So Rick, how do you want to do this?
Well, Neil, I mean, you have some topics that you want to cover today, and maybe give them an overview of the plan of conservation and development, whatever you've done with the other land use commissions.
Yeah, we've met with just about every, almost all committees, commissions, all the different names of the departments we've also met with. And we do the same thing with everyone. We have some discussion questions, which is just a guide. We don't have to literally go through that one by one, because sometimes you all have something you already have in mind to share. So, but as far as so this is the update to the 2016 POCD. The P&Z believes that a lot of the goals are still very valid. I mean, some of the recommendations as well are valid in the POCD from 2016, and so we're kind of taking a look at all the recommendations from 2016, looking at what's been implemented, what's not implemented, and then we're going through, we're touching upon, with each of the committees, we're touching upon some of the 2016 recommendations. I really don't want to spend too much time on that though, because more interest to me is today and tomorrow, as opposed to the past. So I did put in the discussion questions, I outlined some of the pages in the POCD where there are topics, which recommendations for various topics, natural resources, flooding, that sort of thing. Did you? I'm sorry, your name again is Peter. Did you happen to have a chance to look at that since you brought that? If there's
the 2016 report.
The 2016. If there's anything you want to say about that, I'd be happy to hear about it.
Sure, at the right time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Happy to.
No, we can start talking about that now. Then essentially, I'd like to get down to some of the questions that are about today and tomorrow, and then I also want to talk about some of the questions that were, some of the ideas that were sent to me by, is it Peter? Bill, sorry, Bill.
Unless somebody else sent something else out.
I'm happy to I guess the first thing, since you printed out the 2016, I figured you maybe have taken a look at it and have something to say about that. So I definitely would like to hear your thoughts on 2016 and some of the recommendations and implementation.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I did take a look at printing out the 2016 report, and although we're the Environmental Protection Commission, the word environmental is a very broad term, but the state defines the Inland and Wetland Watercourse Commissions very differently. So I think legalistically our concern as a commission really relates to watercourses and upland review areas, but I did look at this much more from an environmental point of view, because I think environment touches environment, and if we're protecting certain watercourses, particularly for wildlife, it doesn't make sense to have other implications impacting that wildlife from another direction. So a couple of things that just occurred to me. I mean, there were a number of points here that do touch mostly on our commission activities, but that's mostly related to maintaining and enhancing coastal areas, pages 56 and 58. And I think most of the things I've seen in here are still probably germane today. Some of the action steps I'm not sure were undertaken, but I'd like to see some of those items in there. Bill had mentioned a number of things specific, especially to runoff. But there are some things also that I think in our work here, or my work here, that I've identified is, there are a number of historic trees in town. I know we had an extensive conversation about one tree, I think it was up on Knollwood or one of those areas up there. Beautiful tree, significant, but there was no protection for that tree. And the 2016 report does say in here to protect historical trees as a goal,
Right.
but no actions have been taken. So I would like there to be some strong consideration of an ordinance. We would not be the only municipality in Connecticut to protect historic trees, but I would like to see some action, particularly when we look at a tree like the one we did see. Was that a walnut tree?
I don't remember.
Well, St.
what type it
Nicholas?
was.
Yeah, St. Nicholas.
St. Nicholas.
St.
Yeah,
Nicholas,
St.
you're right, it's
Nicholas.
St. Nicholas. But some means or mechanism, the 2016 report talks about, trying to inhibit clear cutting of trees. But how do we do that without an effective ordinance? So that was an important point related to protection of historic trees, trees of a certain variety and species, especially when the diameter of the tree exceeds a certain amount, and then the prevention of clear cutting trees. To me, should be a strong objective, particularly on the conservation part. Another item is lighting and town lighting. So Westport recently went through some activity to create dark skies ordinances. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
But there are a number of things that I think we ought to be doing. I mean, there's one thing in relation to allowing someone to encroach their swimming pool, particularly in a wetland area. But if they're going to have a big spotlight there on the pool,
Right.
and it's going to run, 24/7, or at least at the nighttime, without limitation to the usage, it's disturbing to all of the wildlife and ecosystem that we're trying to protect through our activities here. So some sort of dark sky type of consideration. The Tactic Audubon Society has put out a model outdoor lighting regulation for Connecticut municipalities, where it tries to refine the scope of the lighting, the time of the lighting. No point having a swimming pool lit at 3 in the morning if no one's using it with
Right.
huge floodlights.
And is that what you're seeing in town right now?
Well,
Or-
I think it's all cumulative.
Yes.
So
I
it's
see.
all cumulative. I know that when I moved into my neighborhood, everyone had their lighting turned off, and literally I slept in a dark room. I don't do that anymore because people's lighting is coming from all different
Right.
directions, and that can be avoided by adjusting the time to the necessity of time, directing the lights downward, and also ensuring that the Kelvin level of those lightings are diminished. So I'd be happy after this meeting to submit the model regulation on that point. Invasive species. I don't think this was an issue that was addressed in 2016, and I know that it becomes pretty difficult to address, particularly insects, but it's a lot easier for a homeowner to address some of the invasive species that are starting to pop up. I'm not sure that's a big issue in town at this point, but Carolyn, you may know more about it, but I know Greenwich has had a lot of issues with, some insidious invasive species, but I think that should be, part of conservation as well.
And you're talking specifically about insects or both?
I think it's difficult to
Plants
contain,
and-
I'm talking about plants and planting. We certainly addressed that within the water course, but we recently had a situation which Rick was involved with where some bamboo was, put down right next to the water course. And, there are state statutes as it pertains to bamboo. and it was removed ultimately. But I think it's either, combination of education, but also making that known to homeowners, how to be responsible homeowners. I'll stop there. I have more things to say, but I don't want to monopolize.
Well, I did want to, talk about the EPC as its function in terms of like, I look back at some of the meeting minutes, and you're obviously very involved in specific applications that involve encroaching on wetlands and such. So then, so do you ever, as a committee, are you able to, or are you allowed, permitted to kind of recommend specific ordinances to the town, or even draft ordinances, or is that not in your purview?
That's really, we call it, the town council, it's called a representative town meeting, RTM. And that's their function, and they guard that quite closely, okay? And so, that would be their function to come up with something like that.
We've talked about we need to update these rules, regulations, get more teeth in it, and then it kind of disappears away again. And it's been at least 10 years, because 2016, these regs came out, and it's been 10 years, and I think we really need to look at them carefully, along with Rick pulling up stuff from Westport and other locations, because we're kind of in a vacuum here, just following the same thing over and over.
Well, I guess what we could do is contact the people in, PCNH, Planning, Zoning, and Housing, which is the commission, the committee that would be responsible for that in terms of the RTM. I'll find out who that is.
Or TGS&A, because they're the ones who actually write the
But
ordinances.
we had to first,
You have to define your areas of
we have to
interest.
find what, environmental perspective, we have to say, maybe it's okay, it's 2016. Anything that old makes me suspect.
Yeah.
10 years old, something's changed, something needs to be, we are having trouble all the time with people like trying to take advantage, and they know there's not a lot of teeth.
Yeah.
And so that's a whole concept, that back to your question, is that we need to do that, I believe. I don't know how we put that into this plan, but or just do it. Somehow. It's a lot of work. It's because we've got to sit down and go through page by page what we have.
Wait,
here.
you're talking about our regulations?
Yeah, and it's not that, it's only 20, how many pages is that?
I think he's talking about sponsoring. I think he's talking about not only revising the regulations to be consistent with state statutes, but I think he's talking about sponsoring either changes to ordinances or new ordinances to hit areas of specific interest.
Yeah,
Such as
the ones we wrestle with.
The tree ordinance, or some of the other things where you have specific areas of interest. So I think anybody can sponsor, a change of ordinance, but there is the body, that would be rendering the decisions or embracing those changes. So I guess, I don't know if you were leading down the pathway here, discussion about, what our role is. It's primarily inland wetlands and water courses. We also wear a hat of being a conservation commission, but also the hat of the flood and erosion control board. And I guess that the discussion moves towards, we, at least in my nearly 4 years here, don't play a very active role in the conservation and the flood and erosion control, except as through our permitting process. And if that's the case, where do we expand our role to be more active in providing comments on things before the various land use boards, or sponsoring bills or special activities or educational programs, and I saw there was a movement, in particular with some of the conservation groups, to have a separate conservation commission. So, those are topics for discussion, certainly. But I think you always have to go in when you talk about separate commissions. You really need, part of that discussion has to be about staffing, because you said it's a big commitment of time.
Right.
And funding. So anything that what comes out of this plan of conservation development ultimately leads to a budget process.
Mhm.
You know, is there gonna be enough commitment to provide staff, and is there enough commitment to fund, you know, their initiatives, so.
Because, because the issue of, ordinances is, let me open up that. In Bill's email, for example, when you look at each one, they're obviously underlying all of them is the need for an ordinance to implement all of those,
Right.
not all of those items. And so I think you raised a number of issues already, things that, you'd like to see more regulations about invasive species and education for both, which to make it to round it out. But also in terms of, you are obviously interpreting, or you're working within an existing body of regulations when you're reviewing applications and meeting with things. And so I'm interested in what sorts of things come up that you're operating in that body of rules, but how effective are those rules in terms of groundwater protection? Do you wish there were very more specific rules to work with, or in regards to those reviews?
Well, I'll start with one.
Yeah.
80% of the water courses in the town of Darien are owned on private land. Okay? Except for a few very specific cases I can think of. I'm not, if I have a water course on my property, I'm not required to clean it up. So it can back up, it can, so if a log falls across, it can go downstream, it's like this. And so we had considered at one point 2 years ago to take a drone in the winter, and map it, and then sort of, I won't say do some private shaming. Call you and say, hey Neil, there's a photo of your property, we took it, like this. Come on, clean it up like this. And so that sort of thing can be, I don't know whatever happened. I don't know whatever happened to that project, but it.
Oh, that was actually something that was proposed to do, or no?
Yes, it was proposed. It was actually proposed by the first selectman at the time, and so our mayor, first selectman. So
Right.
And then he ran it by me to ask me what I thought about it. I was like, yeah, because it's totally legal. I can like this, and so let's do it. So then we have much more information, and we can figure out what's if there are bottlenecks in the processes, etc. So, but nothing ever happened with that. I mean, that's one of the things that I would think too. That if we had funding from the first selectman office,
Right.
so why not? That would be a good idea to do in order to improve the flow of the water courses in town. So, what else?
Any other, in terms of working with the existing ordinances, do you feel that there's, you've already mentioned things about lighting already, and, I guess maybe you can continue.
I'll play off of
Okay.
Rick's, he mentioned conservation.
Yeah.
Okay. For the past time that I've been on the EDC, I've been on 13 years now. Okay, we've always talked about conservation.
Yeah.
Well, the barrier to it is there's no central database to this. There's a land trust in town that has a very exact database.
You mean for the easements, the conservation easements?
The conservation easements.
That's
Okay.
what you're specifically talking about?
Yes.
No.
Yeah, the conservation easements. And so the land trust has theirs, okay? We don't have a database that says, hey, we have no audit process until an application comes in front of us that says, oh yeah, the guy blew through it and built, I read that there was a conservation easement, but I decided, I wanted to be able to play catch with my son, so
Yeah.
I took it down and planted grass, okay, for example, which is no, you can't do that, okay? So you have no enforcement mechanism, okay? You have no penalty, okay? We have no penalty. It goes, I can't go to the offender and go,
Right.
nope, can't do that, well, like this. I have power of persuasion and then like this, and so, but there's nothing there that, people can thumb their nose at us. Okay, and say, like this, and then I have to, there's a whole process by which we would have to go through, which is, call them in here and start the whole process aggressively. And so but if I don't know if that piece of property is has conservation easements,
Right.
okay, then, that's the first step is knowledge as to what it is. And then it'd be nice to hook up the two databases,
Right.
land trust and say, okay, we have this easements around here. Okay, well, we have to be careful. We should know that when we start making decisions. So,
Or even 100% go a step further, any property that might have a water course on it. When a new homeowner buys that home and closes title, shouldn't there be a welcome letter from the town telling them what a special property they've bought, and that they, as a homeowner, have certain obligations with respect to that water course?
Yeah, I agree. That was one of my recommendations as well, because I think pretty much everything is in here in the regulations, but, and you might buy a property and on the land record it might say, there's wetlands on here, but what does that really mean to the homeowner? A lot of these people are buying homes for the first time. They don't really know what that means exactly, but a nice welcome letter, like Peter suggested, stating like, before you purchase this property, these are the kinds of things that you're going to have to take into consideration. I mean, like one of the big things for me is fences. People put fences, like they don't even seem to think that, whether they have wetlands or not, like they can just put up a fence by right. And, it's one of those, it's an activity and if it's an activity in a regulated area, it's supposed to come before us.
Right.
But how many applications have we had where we go out to look at it and there's fencing everywhere? It's unpermitted fencing. And we have no idea how it was put in. I mean, if it's a deer fence, chances are, they dug this far down, put in a bag of concrete, and, and that just drives me crazy. I really would like to have some clarification on what kinds of, to make it clearer to people what kinds of things they can and can't do when they purchase a property with wetlands or water courses, and have some consistency in terms of like what we allow, because we don't, I mean, when we have an application and people want to put a fence in, I mean, we try to, if it's going into a wetland, we try to minimize the impact to the wetland. But for applications homes where that's already been done, we have no idea how it's been put in. So I just think there's really a lot of gray area where we could provide clarification. And, ordinances clearly would do that, but I also feel like, I think people very often want to do the right thing, and there's always going to be people who don't care and who don't want anyone to tell them what to do with their property. But I think if it's, parsed in the right language, that it's a benefit not just to the environment, but to them, to their families and so forth, especially like in terms of pesticide applications. I think there's a lot that we could do with education. So
I'm going to tonight's lawn and
Oh, yeah, at the library.
I'm going after this since I was here. I'm going to that, but and I've met with the land trust, Green Wave, and the Pollinator Pathway folks. So similar types of discussions we're having.
Can I just add on Peter's, this whole, I love the idea that we could have a formal letter on a sale. Case in point, pasture lane, just sold. It's gonna be knocked down. There's wetlands all around.
what number?
Right next to where Ross lives, there's one on Ross. So, and there's one on the other side, near what? it's probably gonna get knocked down. They're gonna come in there, it's gonna flip it, somebody's gonna buy it, they're gonna cut all the trees down right to the point, and then they're gonna say, oh, maybe I got a little close, right? If they got that letter from us saying, hey, by the way, maybe it can be nicely printed, but you're on notice too.
Yeah,
That now we realize there's wetlands here, and now you're going to be careful, and along with a list of things.
then they can't
I mean-
plead ignorance, because
Right,
so
yeah.
often people
But
plead
you've got to deal with
ignorance.
realtors, and they
Yeah.
don't want to know about this, they just want
Right.
to make the sale.
Right.
So it's complicated,
Yeah.
but it's a really good point, is we come in after the fact, and lots of these people are very savvy, they know what they can do and get away with it quickly, and then they know there's no fines, or no real problem, to give them a little headache. So we're dealing with that, and then we're dealing with the huge land values we're dealing with, and everybody wants to get every square inch out of that property. And wetlands are not in their mind, and it's not something, they actually don't like it because it's
Right,
schemes,
Right.
right? Or whatever they want to call it. So we're dealing with a tough group with a top, very large value land, and they don't want to be told a thing, as you said.
Particularly alpha personalities.
Yeah,
You know,
and we got to
hey, I made mine, and I'm taking my family
Yeah.
here, and, I'm moving to Darien, and,
I'm
and
feeling,
what's that thing in the back? Listen, take 50 yards, 100 cubic yards of soil, let's level the backyard.
right.
Okay.
So education is a great idea, but it's worthless in this town. Really, I've just seen it so much.
Yeah, but it's,
I
it isn't
disagree.
necessary.
I
Maybe tonight we'll find out.
Right, no,
Maybe tonight.
I disagree, I mean, I think, it's sort of incremental, but
Okay, I was a
do-
little harsh.
Especially, there have been a lot of young families moving into town, especially
Okay,
since
you're right.
2020. And, I think they move here and, they maybe, like I said, maybe they've never owned a home before, this is their first home, and they're not quite sure what to do. So like their neighbor gives them
Yeah.
the name of their landscaper and, and so they just kind of
Yeah.
go on, but they don't stop and, they don't, I think if you can, I know some of the work that the pollinator pathway has done has changed a lot of hearts and minds.
That's good.
About pesticides, about giving up a little bit of lawn to put in native plantings. It's slow, but it's definitely forward going. And I think that, in the absence of having ordinances, I think it's, why not?
We
you
should
know?
probably look at some towns that maybe have put ordinances in and see how they've gotten traction or not. And maybe I'm just pipe dreaming this thing.
What do you do in Stanford? What did they do in Stanford?
In terms of,
Oh, an initial letter if you were on a water course?
they have done, actually, they've done, since I left, they've embraced kind of like the Greenwich model where they do that. They send out a letter to
Nice.
new owners saying you have wetlands and water courses on your property. So they work a lot with
Great.
That would be.
the assessor.
So Greenwich and Stanford both.
Yeah, I think it was Greenwich and Stanford. I know Stanford has just started doing it in the last couple of years.
I mean, I know you're Bill. You're Bill, right?
Yes.
I think the gas blowers, for example, in your email.
Yeah,
I've worked for a town in Westchester.
And Darien's working on it, and I'll tell you right up front, I just threw out the things that bug me most in this town.
Yeah.
Obviously, I do that a lot. Before I read even what you were asking
Yeah.
for, I just threw out, this is what bugs me,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and threw that in. Now, they're all environmental.
Right.
Is it an outreach for us? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. We got the only environmental behind our name. So anyway, that's on that deal. There's a lot more issues than what I brought up. I deal with some pet peeves, obviously. So anyway, now that I've said that, somebody else should speak on this.
Well,
So
Peter, why don't you continue
I
with
just
your-
want to quote from a University of Connecticut report. It's called Identifying the Change in Heat Vulnerability and Land Use in Connecticut. It's dated October 13, 2021, and written by a number of PhDs, funded by HUD, United States HUD. Mariana Fragomenti is the primary author, and this is a quote. It's an extensive report on all the towns across Connecticut. Darien was the town with the highest warming, with a patch in the northeast of town warming on average 8 degrees Fahrenheit over 20 years, page 29. So when I see a report like that, to me, it's screaming out, here's a hot target. We got the northeast part of town, and there's only one thing that causes a town to heat like that. It's impervious surfaces and asphalting of land.
Right.
And removal of trees.
And removal of trees. So that's what kind of gets me going is,
Yeah, that singles us out in a poor manner.
yeah.
Agreed, yeah.
No, that's a strong quote, I think, because I wrote down that, I may have already downloaded that, but thanks for bringing that up. 'Cause I don't think there's so many reports, I didn't go through all of them, so you helped me with that, by identifying that line. But I know you kind of stopped halfway through your write-up. Did you have anything you want to add to that? Because that was all very much in line with what we're talking about.
I think the 2016 report actually does a fairly good job. There are things in here that probably are outdated.
Yeah.
I know chapter 4, I think they make a big thing of enhancing community character.
Right.
So just on a state level, the word character is verboten.
That's right. That's right.
So, we don't want to put something together that will subject us to criticism. But preserving a character of the town is not something we're supposed to do anymore. But I think we can preserve the environment, preserve trees, preserve the environmental setting and the ambiance of the town. I don't think anyone can criticize us for wanting to have more greenery around us than less.
I had a few things, though. From a planning perspective, we're talking about inland wetlands and conservations. I want to talk about flooding and resiliency planning. Is that I don't see that we have a lot of movement in that direction. We have a set of regulations, and we have a lot of individuals with experience in terms of the application of those regulations. But I think more can be done, especially with the flood-prone area regulations. They're called flood damage prevention regulations. There needs to be an update to strengthen the regulations. And we're going to see it more and more as, Darien has a long history of flooding, and you also have the threat of climate change and what's going to happen in terms of rising sea levels.
Right.
So the section 820, I think, really needs to be rewritten to be strengthened. Right now, it's bare bones. Right now, there's not a lot of clarity in it.
You're referring to the 2016 POCD, right?
Well, it's in the 2016 POCD, but in the zoning regulations.
Oh, the zoning, I'm sorry, the zoning regulation.
And, so they need to be updated, they need to be strengthened, and for things such as impact on flood rise, it's not really clear in there. It is to have additional areas of freeboard, given the changes to the floodplain. There's no sections dedicated to meeting the structural requirements that are even in the building code, having to do with fully enclosed areas below design flood elevation. There's also not a lot dedicated to how you evaluate subdivisions. Now, we don't see a lot of subdivisions in this community, but I was flabbergasted when I came here that flood-prone properties are subdivided to create additional properties, dwellings that are going to be subject to flooding, exposing more individuals to flood hazards, exposing emergency response to additional hazards. So that is one thing I think maybe one of the objectives is to revise the flood regulations to be given clarity and to be more restrictive and strengthened. The other thing is, you could talk about riverine flooding, but I was just kind of focused on the coastal matters. There really should be a coastal, I think, study for resiliency purposes, flooding and resiliency purposes. And it can be limited to public properties at first, but if the objective of your flood regulations are to promote public health and safety of the general public, reduce flood losses, diminish expenditures of public money for flood protection projects and relief efforts, and minimize, prolonged governmental or business interruptions is the general objective of the flood regulations. A study of the coastal areas, again, in mind that we have a severe flooding problem, close to sea rise, that you really should be identifying the places that are most vulnerable, the public properties that are most vulnerable, the features such as sewage pump stations and infrastructure and parklands, and then generating a plan to protect them for the future. And what I've learned in the past in doing these types of projects is that part of that plan is to develop shelf-ready projects. Anytime that there's funding available, is many of the communities that are most successful have their studies done. FEMA never wants to pay for studies, just about, but they want to take something off a shelf and plug it in, so when grant monies are available, usually post-storm, that the money is there and you're looked at more favorably than the rest. So any kind of assessment and resiliency study, again, it's to identify areas of the most risk, develop shelf-ready projects, and that you should also establish potential funding and permitting pathways in order to get there. Kind of in the whole thing with the conservation, but also flooding.
Right.
The inventory that everybody seems to be talking about. An inventory of properties. Darien did a great thing. It's virtually unheard of in the purchase of Great Island. Purchase a coastal property that has so many resources on it, but it's also has areas that are subject to flooding. Part of an inventory to identify open spaces that are current, but you also look for perhaps the properties with the most flooded spaces, and perhaps target them for a future purchase or a commitment to apply conservation easements or restrictions. Again, it's to reduce the flood risk. One thing I saw there talked about over and over again was drainage. One thing that should be updated is that we spent a better part of 2 years, both internally and with the consultants, we updated the town's drainage manual.
Right.
That significantly strengthened the drainage manual. It provide clarification on submittal standards, and it toughened the requirements for drainage impact and water quality impacts. So it finally made us more in line with many of the other communities in Fairfield County, but it's been designed, vetted, and it's currently under an adoption process. So I think that's probably
But
an update.
that one still is slight on the sediment use of right now, our town doesn't have to pull out any of the sediment traps every 3 years. So even that needs work. They're looking at water getting off it, but they're not worried about sediment and what the toxics is contained and where that sediment's going. So unless they've changed that in the last 6 months, they're still back on, hey, it's our option. We only have to do it every 3 years. So our town needs to look at that. It's not just water, it's the byproduct, whatever else is on that street needs to be managed correctly. And
My second point.
Oh, sorry. By the way, your first point
Great
is very
minds
good
think
because
alike.
Stanford is doing the sustainability, as you know, probably right now with lots of money on all the coastal areas. They got tons of money, I don't know how they got it, and they're working on all the low points at Stanford right now. And they're going to be ready with plug and play when they need
I can
it.
tell you how they got it.
You probably wrote it.
Okay, well, good job. Sorry.
Part of I think there has to be a greater commitment. I mean, they're working towards it. They're moving in a positive direction here. Has to do with the commitment for staffing and funding, and for a lot of this GIS mapping of things such as storm drain systems and sanitary sewer systems, that it's in process. But, with that, when you have a good picture of where things go and how they go and how things drain, you can develop a good, and there should be a commitment to develop a good long-term plan for not only improvements, but also for maintenance. And I think that's where you're going,
Yeah, there's two things here.
There's in Stanford they're very engaged in trying to address their MS4 commitments, held to a much higher standard there, and it has to do with the size of the community and how, sewage treatment plants, whether they address and their separate storm and water systems. But, they've mapped their infrastructure, and they've committed to entire departments essentially to comply with the MS4s. They have a cyclical maintenance schedule for all the catch basins, removing that sediment. They have to report it to the DEP how much they accumulate. They go out and they're active in cleaning their drainage structures or hydraulic structures such as bridges. But probably the good first step here is, and it's not to say that they're not doing it, because they are doing it here and they're moving in the right direction, but I think there really needs to be a more aggressive commitment towards staffing and funding to get the information that you need in order to develop a usable plan. And that has an impact not only on drainage and flooding of the streets, but things like Holly Pond and our receiving bodies of water. And the last thing I had was, how Bill has a list of things.
Yeah.
So one thing that I thought was unusual here is, in other communities, their ordinance relative to like sanitary sewers require that once the town comes in and they design, they construct and activate sanitary sewer, is that owners are committed to tie into that sanitary sewer within X number of days. So I think what happens here is there's no requirement that you tie into the sanitary sewer.
Is it at their expense, or do they get, are they
No, you're
subsidized?
paying.
The tie-in's your expense.
The tie-in is your expense.
Yeah.
It's your expense, but you're also paying the
They're not
assessment
required
too.
to, it's ridiculous.
But,
Yeah.
you have a lot of, still, I was surprised the number of septic systems that you have that individuals continue to use when there's sanitary sewer across the street. And as you know, septic systems have a useful lifespan.
Yeah.
And if you care about, I think, the quality of waters in our riverine systems in Long Island Sound, that might be a positive thing to do, is to work with the sewer commission and the other appropriate commissions to say, here it is, sanitary sewer's there, it's active, you need to tie in.
Because we put these out, you put them out as a plan, we don't have to have a solution for everyone, right? I mean, the main thing is we see this as a real problem, and we don't have to say, and here's what you should do. Actually, they don't even want that in this plan, do they?
You can be a little prescriptive,
Okay. All right.
except,
Then that's, items like that. should get
it's like
plugged in.
you could say, do a study or create a plan for, but you wouldn't actually do the plan as part of the plan.
No.
But you can, if there's a clear track to follow in order to get to somewhere, that's kind of what the POCD would want. And for implementation's purposes, that's something the POCD would want to probably outline at least.
Because what he hit on is, it's maddening.
Yeah.
That right across the street, and meanwhile, you can see the land is just pulsating with, let's not talk about it, it's disgusting. So,
Well, you also want to get into some of your things. I think the golf courses, for example. Well, not just the golf courses, but also I think there was the pesticides.
you talking about sewage or you're
Yeah,
talking about
municipal lands,
pesticides?
municipal.
Well, I mean, just looking at just number one and number two. Well, number two about the pesticide use in town and having the town lead by starting with themselves.
Right.
Because currently there's no policy to reduce pesticide use. There's nothing there's no, they use pesticides and such, so they're not necessarily,
The town of Darien.
yeah, the town of Darien,
Yep.
they're not necessarily.
I mean, that's gonna start changing anyway, because there are some very serious concerns with what's coming out of some of these pesticides. It starts knocking out the whole oyster industry.
Right, right,
Humans start getting Parkinson's disease, you know, a lot of things are starting to creep out there.
right.
It will change, but can't we be ahead of some of that and say,
Right.
hey, country clubs, why don't you just, you know, curb this back a little bit? Because we've got statistics showing what's coming out of your property down these rivers, you know, and try to educate.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if we can do anything other than that, so. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I look at, for example, some of the ponds, Tilly Pond's a good example, and it is just green because all the fertilizer is just washing into there, and it's really disgusting.
I mean, I think it's part of our role is to try to push some of this along if we can. Back to one more thing on the flooding. I don't know if you're still putting it, but one of your big pieces in this, it wasn't you, in 2016.
Uh-huh.
You had a whole page on freeboard. You know, the freeboard, the extra foot.
Right.
You know, here's my little pet peeve over at our friends on Old Kings Highway.
Yeah.
That that's no freeboard there. So I love that idea. I don't think it's got any traction because everybody said, hey, what FEMA says is what goes. But this was put in for some
That's
reason.
not true, we do have freeboard in Darien.
We do?
Yeah, you have 1 foot of freeboard,
Oh, that's true.
when a structure needs to be structurally
That's true.
flood-proof, that's what it.
That's the FEMA
You're right.
connection.
So if you have,
You're
the
right.
base flood is elevation 40, you have to flood-proof to elevation
The one, okay.
41.
Yeah.
The only thing is in strengthening your flood regulations, how do you interpret that? Where's that to?
And
You know,
it's tricky.
it's not so much tricky, it's how a regulator interprets it and clearly states what the requirement is, and to ensure that not only your floor is elevated, but all your utilities, your
Sure.
insulation, all these things that when have flood exposure are, you know, they're damaged, they're an insurance claim, and causes, you know, impact on people's lives and property. So.
But we're pretty strict on that. If you're
If it's
down
in
in
a
Road
flood
Bed,
zone,
right,
right.
and they're rebuilding down there, the FEMA comes in, puts the extra foot on there, all utilities have to be above that point, right? So aren't we pretty strict on when we go through that?
You know, a foot of freeboard is the standard now.
Yeah, that's right.
It is a standard across, I mean, it's both in local regulation and the building code.
Yeah.
They've kind of ensured that they're
Okay.
consistent. But there are things that are, that can be placed into the local ordinance that is just a good planning tool. I know in Stanford, we had things that applied to developments that where even the most incremental increase of risk was held to an even higher standard, like schools.
Sure.
You know, jails, you couldn't put a school in the floodplain unless it was
Yeah.
related to the 500-year storm, or, so, you know, irreplaceable records. We had a facility in Stanford that was that held the electronic records for the New York Stock Exchange. You know, and you want to make sure that their facilities had extra levels of protection. We did that for their power supply and all that. So those are things that can be, you know, again, that has to be an edit in 2016.
So would that come out of, you don't recommend this stays into the?
Well, I mean, it's already been adopted.
Yeah,
but
that's good.
strengthening the flood regulations, I think, is an absolute.
Did you have more?
Well,
you marked
yeah, I went
that.
through every
So you
dang
had
page, but I can annoy the heck out of
Yes.
people in this.
And
So, you want me to go through pages, or somebody else got some
Peter,
other
do you
No,
stuff?
I don't have any more.
Okay.
All right. This is, I just took your document there and just kind of made quick comments, and a lot of them just, all right, so the very first one, protect water quality. I would love to add, you have the drainage system, you know, discharge directly to water courses, we take that over. We also should add in there septic systems and you know, along the coastline.
Uh-huh.
So if anybody wants to follow along, it makes more sense, but if not, so it's a very important part, you know, we got the septic systems, we got pesticides, those are
I mean, one
key
of the things-
protecting water quality.
Neil, just so you understand, when there is a large rainstorm here, okay, you can't go
Did
swimming.
today count? It was kind of,
No, probably not. But a little larger, you can't go swimming because there's too much bacteria in the water.
how
Okay?
long does that last usually? A couple of days?
Couple of days.
in the sound.
Yeah, in Long Island Sound,
Yeah.
in Long Island Sound. And so, I mean, and
It's a
the
huge-
reason for that
Huge
is.
piece, I think, should be
What?
added. You know, it's part of the
Yeah.
water, protect water
You
quality, add one more line.
Okay, well, the town is paying, the town's people who are regular users of the beaches and the,
Yeah.
and the public water are suffering because, because of that, okay? And so you have but that's something that always, for example, we don't talk about a lot here, but it's really, a bug of mine, okay? They said, I want to be able to swim. Well, I joined Darien because it has beaches. Well, I can't use the beach because it's for 3 or 4 days because the water has to circulate. The tides have to come in and out and take.
And I think the big one, we're self-inflicting that.
Yeah,
It's not
yeah.
like, oh, it's coming from Norwalk, it's coming from Stanford, yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
But we're self-inflicting it with our septic issues and our fertilizer issues,
Yeah.
that we're dumping all over the place, so.
Yeah.
Instead
That's
of let's
primarily
blame.
bacterial though, in terms of what causes the closure, the bacteria.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, it's a bacteria, sorry.
The health director goes and,
Right,
says.
Yeah.
Yeah, the algae
Comes in and
bloom
says-
and all
says
that.
no
stuff.
That's all, yeah, yeah.
That's-
But you're right, let's get bacteria.
Now, if you really wanted to swim, go ahead, okay, because there's no cop down there that's saying,
Yeah.
stop, but you are running a risk. So.
And then another, on page 61, so you still have that state aquifer that we have down. Is that still, are we still pulling water out of that aquifer down over near Norwalk? It's listed in
It's
here,
on
you
the
know.
map, right.
Darien
I
has
don't
a state-defined aquifer protection area, a recharge area. I mean, I don't know.
There is.
That's even valid anymore.
I did some work with Aquarium, and now there's certain levels of aquifers underneath Darien and underneath, southern Fairfield County that extend into Westchester, et cetera, depending on your level of depth. And the question is, pre-COVID, there was a whole big thing that maybe for whatever reason we were drawing water from and drawing down this aquifer. Okay, I think that's been resolved just naturally, okay? But we have to be conscious of the aquifer because it is used by Southern Fairfield County, Westchester, etc. And we should be most concerned about contaminating it because there are people, there are lots of people who have wells, most of Darien is on public water, but if you get into, there are people who have wells that go down, and that's a problem. So,
I'm gonna shorten this whole thing. Anyway, protect the water quality, there's all these policies that were put down there, and I think most of them have no improvement whatsoever. This is all stuff they were hoping 10 years ago, and in many cases, it's gotten worse. I think the whole fertilizer, green lawns, 24, all year long.
but, okay, it goes on.
Has made things worse, unfortunately.
It used to be that I could walk around Darien, particularly commercial properties, and we can all agree that it rained today, okay? They'll have sprinkler systems on. And you sit and you go, like this, right? And so, I happen to know the chief of operations for Aquarium, the local water company here.
Oh, okay.
And I call him up and I go, hey, this guy, it clearly rained today. Okay, this commercial property is watering.
Yeah.
Okay, and then they would send down their inspector down there and they get, 4 warnings, is it? 3 or, there's a couple of warnings that they issue. 4th warning is serious because after that they can cut your water off, okay? But, and it's just to encourage getting water sensors in the watering systems, using, doing it at the right time of day, doing it in the morning when there's less evaporation, stuff like this. And so, they've made a lot of progress in this town, okay? Which is good, okay? Are we there then? No. Okay, but it's something you could point out that says, hey, from the last to now, there's progress been made, okay? But, it's something that we have to take a look at.
Now let's add one more thing to that.
Okay.
So, everybody wants a 9-foot basement, even if there's a high water table, and, I don't know how we can stop it. All right, they've got some pumps running, they're pumping the water, and most of it's supposed to stay on their property. But, there's a way that we could do it and say, you know what, you can't put a basement. Back in the old days, you didn't have a basement in those areas because you knew better. But now everybody, it's again, you gotta get square footage.
When the house is within our area of regulation,
No, but
but
this is again-
we each have our,
Right.
when the mosquito bites me, okay? The first thing I do is ask for a perk test.
yeah, no,
Okay, and Rick knows me well enough to go and say, do a perk test because I'm guaranteed you're gonna get the.
Yeah, no, and we're doing some of that, but I'm wondering if this should be put out in more of a bigger plan that we have to control, if we really want to get a hold of flooding issues and prevent damage,
Yeah.
then we need to do some more in this case.
The new drainage manual
Yeah.
does dedicate a significant portion of it towards basements. And, there's like a tiered measures to address it. There's one, avoidance,
Avoidance
provide
number one,
information,
yes.
avoidance, reduction in your depth of basement to avoid the seasonal high groundwater. And then finally, if there are groundwater influence, then you have to mitigate the impact of your groundwater control systems with a separate system. So, and then even the manual also kind of outlines how you do it.
Who's the author of that document?
Was that?
Who is the author of the document you're referencing?
The
Drainage manual.
Drainage manual.
The drainage manual?
Who are we talking about?
When we revised it, we had a consultant take the lead, Ty and Bond.
So
And it
that was Joe
myself-
Canis.
Myself.
It's a town document.
Yes, it was generated over the last couple of years, myself, Jeremy, Gentile, Fred, and a couple others had impact on the things we wanted to see, and that was one of the things. So it was generated, it was reviewed by other engineers in town as well, and then it's
So it's been
process of being-
published.
Is it in
adopted.
effect? Yeah, is it in effect, I guess?
It's in the
I think
process of being
it's
adopted,
It's in
right?
process.
All right, well, that's huge.
Probably
That's
July,
very helpful.
July 1st.
Okay.
Well,
Did you cut
that's
out
a big deal.
You cut out the 1,000-foot exemption in areas that are flooded? Because that's a loophole that should not be
Well,
allowed.
for drainage impact, we've gone from 1,000 square feet. Before you start doing a formal drainage report, we dropped it to 400.
Oh, good.
Oh, wow.
So that's consistent with.
Excellent.
That's consistent with other communities as well. So we're playing catch up on a lot of things here.
When do you think we'll actually have this out and
I
about?
think it's, again, it has been, I think we still have to do the ordinance change to adopt it. But it's complete, the document is complete, it's just a matter of adopting it and whatever legal elements to.
So when it's done, they come to us first on this project, we can now cite some of that stuff and say, you do it.
Everybody, not
Well, they
only for
shouldn't
us.
be presenting to us unless they have
Well, first we gotta-
read the drainage manual and go, because we should be telling them it's not out. It'll be staff that'll be telling them. And sit there and go, don't, listen,
Well,
get out of here because
many
we're not even
many
gonna
of the
consider
private
it.
engineers participated and they made sure that, they drew from a
Yeah.
handful of engineers, and what are your comments?
Ty and Bond is always our peer reviewer, and they were involved with it too, I imagine.
Well,
so-
Twine Bond was the lead, they generated the document.
Good.
And we utilized some of the MS4 standards, the state standards. Stanford had a newer drainage manual that we did over the last 4 or 5 years there. Greenwich has some pretty strict standards too that they updated their manual. So
That's good.
again, it's updated, it's tougher, and not only for drainage but for water quality. And then the real thing that we always suffered was the submittal standards, and then the certification standards are all very specific outlined.
I'm done. Thank you. That's a good way to end it for me. Appreciate that.
Good.
So another kind of a loophole, like you asked for, recommendations to our existing regulations.
Yeah.
Two cases in point recently where houses that were rebuilt were not subject to us because even though they were in regulated areas, they were using the existing foundation.
I see.
And they were just building up. So in one case in particular, I noticed that there were 3 pipes from the house that had been, I don't know if it had been entirely rebuilt, but it had been pretty much rebuilt. And the pipes, there were 3 pipes going into a nearby water course. And I think that that's a loophole that we should address.
Oh, there are 3 new pipes?
No,
Oh,
they're
I
existing from the old house.
I see, okay.
It's just they tore it down and rebuilt and, but, that would be, again, we're trying to find areas.
So, when roof accumulates water, comes down through the gutters, down through the drains, in the past, just goes right out into
Water
this.
course.
And so, if you don't want to go across your property, you use the slope in order to, you dig a trench and put it underneath, and I think that's what she's referring to. I wasn't sure so they could use that.
Right, but you
Okay.
weren't able to advise on that application at all, right? Because-
Not on that aspect of
Of
it.
that aspect of it, okay, got it.
Mhm.
I see.
Because normally, we would have required them to put in underground detention.
Right.
And we weren't in these cases because they were just building over the existing foundations. So I think, I don't know how often it really happens. It happened twice recently.
I know, but one of
It
the
sounds to me like you're suggesting, Carolyn, that the loophole of grandfathered foundation needs to be tightened up.
Well,
If when you build a new house, you have to put underground detention.
right,
Yeah,
If you're gonna utilize the existing foundation, but just
Yes.
build more square feet above, to me, what you're asking is, should the regulation require you to put detention systems?
yeah,
Right.
I think
yeah, you don't get
so.
grandfathered
Simple
in.
question.
Yeah,
okay,
that's
grandfathered in.
exactly what it, and not only that, but just like the machinery that, because, we require, tracking pads and, things to protect the wetlands while construction is being done. And you can see how the land all around is, the huge machinery has been there and there's been nothing to protect the stream.
Right.
So, it's just, one thing.
Well, right, I think, it sounds like what you're saying about is to give you the ability to comment on that aspect, that provision needs to be modified, whatever that
Sounds like it to me.
Yeah.
And you do, for every application, do you do a site visit?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, yeah. That's one of the good things about this commission.
Yeah, you get to
We're pretty
visit.
active, we go out and,
Yeah,
say hi.
right, you get to see it, that's good.
There's a
Oh.
lot of things that you notice when you
Right.
go out in person as opposed to just what's on the application.
Absolutely.
Pipes, invasive species,
Topography.
how close the manicured lawn is to a water course and so forth.
Junk, people pile junk.
Junk, yeah.
People pile junk up on, or as we had in one case, people would take stuff and throw it on public land.
We've had some good ideas. We have to kind of close out with a meeting here afterwards.
Okay.
And is there anything else that you need to cover?
No, thank you. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with me. So this is the very last commission or committee meeting. We finally finished all of them. We are going to have some sort of summary and somehow, and it's interesting how most of the committees and commissions have referred to each other in a certain sense. Like I think you were saying, well, the sewage commission should say something, and then this commission. So there's been a lot of good kind of crossing of different commissions, and wondering or having them take on certain things, and so we're gonna put together some sort of summary. We don't know how exactly it's gonna be. It's not gonna be in minutes. It'll be more of some useful thing that we can take from all the different committees and just.
Can I ask just one question, Rick? What would be one of the best things that you could use to enforce and get people to do it right the first time, or when you catch them doing something wrong? I mean, you're the guy you're the cop. What tools can we give you to get, a better outcome?
There's always things that you can do, like, again, we really need to update our wetland regulations. Some of the tools that you could build into that is bonding on all the applications.
Right.
You can do things such as for long-standing violations, you have to do notices of violation, you put on the land records, allowable by the state statute. But we need to write those into our local regulations. We should do things such as for after-the-fact permits or violators, when they come in for their permit, the different fee structure.
A financial.
A different fee structure.
Okay.
Some places do twice the fee, some places do 3 times the fee.
And some fine people as
Well,
well.
there's really no provisions that you typically would do with inland wetlands for a fine unless you went through the enforcement process and you did your show cause hearing, your cease and desist order, your show cause hearing. Typically, a certain the board or commission lays out a potential remedy. Further non-compliance, you can go to Superior Court. And finally there, the courts can administer fines and penalties.
It's a due process.
Some places have ticketing for certain things. There's a lot that comes with that. There has to be appeals boards and people have to be trained. A lot of the enforcement stuff has to do with getting out there and seeing it. So, Darien's a small town. They have relatively small staffs. If there's a commitment for expanding staffs and having expanding space in the buildings and budgeting, I think that is the big things in terms of what a positive impact on enforcement. But there are also, as I said, things that you can do to build it into your regulations to give you some teeth.
So you put a broad statement out there, we feel there should be a stronger enforcement. Don't have to say how. How are we gonna get the money? Who's gonna lose their budget? We don't say that, but we say there should be
That's
stronger.
for Neil, that's for you,
Right,
Neil.
Right, that's a.
Stronger
Right.
enforcement, and then we
That's
worry about
we feel enforcement
how we're gonna get somebody,
Needs to be
helping you do
improved
this.
Right.
over the current methods. Okay, because we have noticed that lots of that there are violations. Okay, and we don't have a lot of power to deal with violations.
Don't forget, everything that we do has to be consistent with the law.
Yeah, really.
So,
That's why I have Peter right here.
no, when you say that things like
A lawyer.
in a certain level of fairness in your application
Yeah,
of
Sure,
standards.
yeah.
Things like, going back, we have retroactive, gone out to sites and, pulled pipes out of streams and those kinds of things, but but it was part of a greater plan in which an alternative was part of it. But everything we do is, all these ideas have to be based in the law and in ordinance.
Clearly.
So,
All right.
All right, sorry. You were about to finish, I'm sorry.
No, thank you, thanks so much.
I wanted to have it say.
I think if you're going to have a motion to adjourn.
You want a motion to adjourn?
It's a meeting.
All right.
Yeah.
Motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion, Mr. Chairman, to adjourn this meeting of the Environmental Protection Commission with an outside consultant regarding the Darien Plan of Conservation and Development updates.
Second that motion?
All in favor?
That was very complete.
Good night, Channel 79.